Are you familiar with the concept of the reactionary gap? It expresses basic principles of human performance factors. You've likely heard that action beats reaction. Human performance factors experiments conducted by Dr. Bill Lewinsky and his staff at the prestigious Force Science Research Center demonstrate that a suspect can draw a gun from the waistband and point and fire in as little as 9/100ths of a second. The officer, even with gun drawn and anticipating the need to fire, needs an average of 31/100ths of a second to perceive the threat and pull the trigger. Understanding reaction time isn't new science. Now toss in the requirement of recognizing the stimulus. Is it a gun or a cell phone? And making a choice among possible responses, and the reaction time gets much longer. The suspect doesn't have the equal time burden because he made the decision to draw and fire without any externally perceptible cue for the officer to see. That's the reactionary gap. The officer is behind the curve in the OODA loop, sometimes even fatally so. Moreover, the officer has many things competing for attention. He or she can effectively attend to one stimulus at a time only. No matter how good you think you are at multitasking, science proves that you're not. Think about the last traffic crash that you investigated that was caused by a driver texting and driving, eating and driving, applying makeup and driving, and so on. Those folks thought that they could pay attention to more than one thing too. Your eyes may be directed at a stimulus, and still you don't see it. This is inattentional blindness. Perhaps you've experienced a common form of inattentional blindness known as tunnel vision. When you're facing an assailant with an edged weapon or a striking weapon such as a baseball bat or tire iron, at what distance does the assailant present a deadly threat? How much space should the officer have between him and the assailant to compensate for the reactionary gap? What other factors figure into this calculus? There's a universal component of police training in the United States known as the 21-foot principle. Officers are commonly taught at the police academy to be ready to fire, move offline from the attack, take cover, or take some other decisive step when an assailant is threatening use of an edged weapon within 30 feet. Many police basic training courses include a scenario known as the Tueller drill. In this scenario, an officer in training is presented with a role-playing suspect poised 21 feet from the officer and holding a knife. The role-playing suspect is directed to charge, while the officer trainee remains in place and defends herself or himself from a knife attack. Research initially conducted by Dennis Tueller and published in an influential article showed that an assailant armed with a short-handled edged weapon standing 21 feet from an officer is able to stab and or slice the officer with the edged weapon before the officer is able to draw and fire his or her handgun more than half the time, and that even those officers who are able to fire are still very likely to be stabbed or sliced. Consequently, officers are repetitively taught that they should draw their weapons and be prepared to defend themselves from an edged weapon well before an assailant closes to a 21-foot distance. Officers are taught to be ready to respond to an imminent threat when an assailant closes to a 30-foot distance. Someone unfamiliar with the realities of armed assault might ask, why didn't the officer just back up? Well, many times officers do try to add distance by backing up, but it isn't that simple. An officer facing an advancing assailant and backing away to create distance is at a profound and potentially fatal speed and spatial disadvantage. An officer backpedaling from a starting position, as a startled officer typically does in trying to escape an attack, has an average first step of just barely 2 feet and does not accomplish a backward stride of 3 feet even after 6 strides. Now those times reflect backward movement on even and flat floors in a well-lit gymnasium, not on uneven ground such as pavement slope, potholes, rocks, debris, gutter dip. The retreating officer has a further disadvantage of carrying an average equipment load of approximately 19 pounds, further slowing the officer. In sharp contrast to a retreating officer's pace, the average assailant charging forward covers more than 3 feet in his first stride. The assailant's third step stretches out to more than 4 feet. By the 6th stride, the average assailant is closing distance at more than 5 feet per stride. The average forward-charging assailant can propel himself through 6 full strides in slightly more than 1.5 seconds. We've tested and confirmed these human performance principles in experiments in our VirTra Virtual Reality Center. In over 200 trials of an officer facing an assailant who suddenly draws a knife and charges at the officer, we've seen that fewer than half of the officers react by drawing moving offline, and firing before the knife is slashed across their throats. We've also demonstrated the profound differences in speed of officers backing away from a suspect charging forward with a knife or a club. I've had the opportunity to collaborate with and teach the derivative principles of Lieutenant Tueller's original experiments on many occasions over the past 30 years. Dennis Tueller joins us today to talk about just what the 21-foot principle means and how today's officers should apply the principle in their training and work on the street. Dennis, thanks for taking the time to help us better understand your original findings and what we've learned over the years. I think that there's a great misconception about the 21-foot principle. In fact, my friend Jim Glennon notes that the term 21-foot rule is really a bastardized misappropriation of what's better known as the Tueller drill. Did you ever intend the 21-foot principle to be a rigid rule?
No, I absolutely did not. And let me thank you for the opportunity to discuss some of this and clarify some of the misconceptions that have come about. That initial little training that we did, that experimenting we did, was based on a question from a new police officer. We were on the range drawing and shooting, and a question came up about use of deadly force, and at what point am I justified in shooting someone who might be coming toward me aggressively with a knife or a club, a contact weapon. At what distance? Essentially what they were asking is how close is too close. And after some discussion, I realized that I didn't have a good answer for that. So we decided to do a little experiment, a little role play. I assigned one of the young officers to play the role of the aggressor and another one to play the role of an officer about to be attacked. And of course we didn't have any props or anything. We just wanted to see how quickly we could cover 7 yards, because we'd been drawing and shooting at that traditional 7-yard line or 21 feet. And timed the attack with a couple of stopwatches and discovered that somebody beginning from a dead stop can cover that 21 feet in 1.5 to 2 seconds. We repeated the experiment with different people, slightly different heights, ages, male, female, and it was pretty consistent. And that was sobering, because we thought we were doing pretty well at being able to draw and shoot and engage a target at 7 yards in 1.5 to 2 seconds. We came to realize that if all you do is stand there and wait for the attacker to come and you draw and you shoot, they can be on top of you before your bullet can take effect.
I hear some claim that officers are being taught to shoot anyone with an edged or an impact weapon who's closer than 21 feet from the officer. Is that consistent with what you've trained and observed over the years?
No, of course not. And I, as you just described, I have heard trainers, again, use that bastardized term 21-foot rule to actually say that, well, yeah, if you shoot someone further than 21 feet away, you could be charged with homicide, or someone inside of 21 feet, you're justified in shooting. Well, there are so many other factors. The totality of circumstances. Are there other obstacles, cover between you and the other person? Are there other uninvolved bystanders around? There are circumstances where you may be justified in shooting, but you simply, for practical reasons, can't, because it puts other people in danger. Now, I relate it more recently to following distance in traffic, and that's a sliding scale. If you are at 30 miles an hour, the following distance to the car in front of you is going to be different than at 70 miles an hour on the freeway. How much time do you need to react, put on the brakes? How long will it take your vehicle to stop in a given distance? So as far as a specific distance, the individual defending him or herself has to be able to assess the circumstances, apply their understanding of law and policies and procedures, and do what is necessary to defend themselves if they perceive a deadly threat.
Isn't the principle more about being prepared and moving offline, creating distance where possible, and possibly even seeking cover?
Yes, recognizing that this is a reality, that if you see a threat soon enough, you can start reacting. You can make aggressive, decisive movement off the line of attack. Take advantage of cover. We often think of cover in the context of a gunfight and a shooting fight, and you need something that stops bullets. In the case of someone attacking with a contact weapon, perhaps just obstacles, furniture in the room, putting things between you and the person coming at you to slow down their advance, to give you more time to react, to process mentally whether or not deadly force is justified, to draw your pistol, to employ marksmanship if shooting is ultimately is what you decide to do.
In every class that you've taught with me since my police academy days, I've heard you say, action beats reaction. That's really about the reactionary gap. What can you share with today's cops about the reactionary gap and increasing their chances of surviving an armed encounter?
The person acting always has the advantage over the person reacting. And in a law enforcement role, we are very frequently in that reactive mode. So to your question, what we need to do is recognize that the threat is real. And you have to internalize and believe that, yes, it can happen to me. And that helps you start processing the scenarios of how I would respond, what I would do, where would I move in this particular circumstance. A trainer I worked with at Salt Lake PD years ago, Jim Hoffman, came up with a little phrase to help officers remember this, and it stuck with me. We talk about, is there available cover? And a lot of studies of gunfights going back generations have found that officers frequently do not take advantage of available cover. In the context of a contact weapon, that can slow down or keep your adversary from getting to you with the knife or club. But his phrase was, in your mind, as you approach a potentially dangerous situation, ask yourself, where is my tree? What is available? And in the context, it doesn't have to be a tree, but what is available? Where, if this situation goes really bad, what are some of my options? Where is an escape route? Where can I move that would be provide cover? How can I gain distance? Because distance and cover buy us time to react, time to respond, time to employ our firearms if it's a shooting situation.
Isn't the concept of the reactionary gap and the OODA loop about staying one step ahead of an armed adversary?
Very much so. The idea that if you recognize the threat soon enough, for example, someone, just as you enter the bar where there's a reported disturbance and this guy brandishes a knife and he's on the other side of the room, and if you recognize that and you know how to respond, draw your pistol, issue verbal challenges, get some cover, get some distance, try to shift that reaction and response time loop the other direction. Do something your adversary doesn't expect. Move decisively, either to cover or off the line of attack. A principle that we've come to recognize, of course, is the idea of tunnel vision, and how under stressful circumstances, all human beings are subject to that. And we relate it to us in the training we do and try to teach people after drawing and engaging the threat that we break that visual contact with the pistol and then break up that tunnel vision by looking around. Well, the people we're fighting are subject to tunnel vision as well. That guy focusing in on either charging at you or raising the gun towards you is looking through a tube. So if you're prepared, again, his action is going to beat your reaction, but if your reaction is to suddenly and decisively move off the line of attack, there's no guarantee that this will work, but now you're stepping out of his little visual tube for just that fraction of a second, and that can switch that OODA loop to where he is now reacting to you, and you engage and you put bullets on target, and then you move again. So you're constantly trying to keep shifting the advantage in our favor.
Could an officer who actually understands the concept of reactionary gap use that principle to even avoid the possibility or the necessity of using force in a particular encounter? Yes,
very much so. My mentor, Jeff Cooper, at gun sight. The American Pistol Institute years ago taught the color code of alertness, and white is unaware, and you're very vulnerable. Condition yellow is what we should be in if we're armed and moving around. We should be paying attention to our surroundings and have that little seed planted that, yeah, that something could happen. And then when you identify the threat, then you switch to condition orange, which is specific threat, and I'm looking for options. But to get outside someone else's OODA loop, you need to start doing something that your attacker doesn't expect. If you recognize these principles, this concept that how quickly someone can close that distance, you can prepare yourself. For example, when you walk into a room, most residential structures, are you going to be in a room that has anywhere close to 21 feet? No, it's going to be half that. So you need to know at those distances you're already behind the reactionary gap curve. So you need to start thinking about where could I move? Are there other physical skills that I can employ? Because you may not have time to get your pistol out and engage a threat at those distances and be able to move off the line and effectively disarm someone. There's a variety of skills that we need to incorporate into this, along with that important, absolutely critical concept of mindset, is believe it can happen to you. You'll be much less surprised. You will not become that deer in the headlights at the moment of truth.
Dennis, thank you for sharing this wisdom with yet another generation of law enforcement, and thanks for many, many years of great service.
Well, thank you again for the opportunity. I'm glad to know that I've had a positive influence on a profession that I care very much about. Thank you.